Hi friends, Andrew Carruthers, Education Director for Sam Villa. Look, there is nothing better than a good textured bob, so today we want to introduce you into a way to achieve this really highly textured, super movable bob with one of our favorite tools, the razor. So within this, we're going to transition between vertical and horizontal sections, use different razor techniques, and we're also going to introduce some blending shear and slide cutting shear techniques to build in this incredible texture. So let's get started with the sectioning. So we've went ahead and got this all set up for you. We've sectioned it off into what we call the foundational breakdown, which means that we're dividing off the head into the most important transitions on the head. The first transition that we create is what we call the vertical transition, which is the transition top to bottom. So right along what a lot of hairdressers call the parietal ridge, we're gonna section and we're gonna follow the natural shape of the crown. Then after we part that, and by the way, start with a center part just because it's a lot easier to maintain. Then we're going to part off this area right here, which we call the horizontal transition. Is probably something kind of unique for many of you. And it's basically where the back of the head starts to change direction really severely and become more the side of the head. Now, we typically find that people want to section over top of the ear. We find that that gives them the perception that the top of the ear is the difference between the front of the haircut and the back of the haircut. And all of this hair right behind the ear that actually lives more on the side of the head, a lot of times gets treated as part of the back of the head, which then creates a lot of overdirection and challenges with that weight that shows up right behind the ear. So we do this type of sectioning at that horizontal transition, the transition from the back to the sides, to avoid that bulky spot over the ear. And it also really protects us from creating the hole over the ear because it tells us to transition in a place that's right before that hairline jumps up and creates that pesky little hole. So we've put a brand new blade into the razor. This is our signature series razor. We've got a straight brand new blade in there. We've also prepped the hair with some Redken Satinware 04. Now, with wet hair in that Satinware 04, we should be able to have a nice slip to the hair, which is one of the essential pieces to cutting well with a razor. Especially since we have a fresh razor blade in there, this thing should just float right through the hair. We're gonna start with a vertical section right down the center back. We'll take about an inch thick section there. And that section is gonna become our guide. So I'm gonna turn her so that you can see the elevation of the hair, mainly because I'm not gonna be introducing overdirection forward or back. We call that natural overdirection, which basically means that the new hair and the guide are going to meet over the center of the section. We're not overdirecting back to the stationary guide because then that's gonna start to build weight forward, and we wanna keep this fairly balanced. So from the side view, you're gonna see the elevation. All through the back area, we are going to follow the natural head shape. And please notice that we have not cut the perimeter length yet. Now we wanna be conscious of where do we want that perimeter length to fall. And if you have a guest that they're really particular about that length, they want it to be precisely without being off at a 1/16 of an inch, we know exactly they want it to be precisely at a certain point, you may want to cut that perimeter first. For most of our guests, if the perimeter is a 1/16 of an inch longer or a 1/16 of an inch shorter, it's not gonna be that big of a deal. And we want to really focus on how the layers fall first, then refine in the perimeter. So we want to make sure that we're going to have plenty of length down here for the perimeter length that we're looking for, which is going to be right there at her neckline. And that puts us, just a couple inches out, maybe, and we'll call that like 4 inches. So as long as I'm at least that length with my layers, we're going to be safe. So we'll take this first piece of the section, which will be about the shortest point of the layers, and we're gonna look at that. And it's gonna be a little over that 4-inch mark, that mark that we need for the perimeter. And we're gonna take that and we're gonna just sort of drape it down. And we're gonna see, where does that sit on her head shape? We wanted to sit just below that occipital, and we are gonna wear this with a little bit of wave and texture to it. So make sure that you check that length with giving the hair a little wave and texture, because if you pull it straight, of course, it's not gonna give you an accurate reading. So that looks pretty good to me. That feels pretty safe as far as the length. We're gonna take that section, we're gonna elevate 90 degrees to the natural head shape. For those of you that are Redken trained, you're gonna know this as planes of the head. We'll come out to our length, and we wanna create a lot of tension here because razor cutting requires tension. Once we get nice tight tension, our finger angle is mimicking the natural head shape, we have our elevation set, then we're gonna take the blade at about a 45-degree angle to the hair itself, and we're gonna make fairly decent size circular motions because we wanna get that nice peak and valley texture into this haircut. This haircut's all about texture, so we wanna make sure we're introducing plenty of texture to it. 90 degrees to the head, slide out. With razor cutting, we're cutting on the back side of our fingers, so we're gonna let that guide slide through our fingers with plenty of space so that we have the room to make those big circles that we want to make to produce our texture. Then, last section. If you take your fingers and place it right up against the head and then slide out, that guides not only your elevation, but also your finger angle. We'll let our guide from above us slide out of the fingers, give us enough space to make those nice circular movements. We'll pick up just one last section there so that we can maintain our tension. Once we get that, before you even move on, just take the hair and play with it a little bit. Get an idea of, is that short enough for me? Now we are gonna have some layers from the top too, so this isn't going to be the very top piece of the layer, but the top layers are going to be held out pretty horizontal, so they're not gonna go a lot shorter. So we want to make sure that we're getting what we want. And we're pretty much perfect. We've got a little bit of hair here to trim off so that we form our perimeter length right where we want it. As we move forward, remember, we're not necessarily using the traveling guide in the same way that many of you think of a traveling guide. A lot of times we think traveling guide and we think we're over directing back to the guide. What we want to do is we want to take a section about an inch wide again. And if you look, now we have a piece of our previously cut section and a piece of our new hair. So this piece, our previously cut section, and this piece, the new hair, if we were trying to gain length forward, we would take this new piece of hair and over direct it back so that that would create more length to this outside. Because we do not want to create length, what we want to do is we want to have those two pieces meet in the center of the section, and what that'll do is keep the length consistent front to back. Elevation is going to stay at that 90 degrees horizontal, or 90 degrees to the head shape. So we're gonna go 90 degrees to the head shape, collect those two sides of the section into the center of the section, lock in, follow the comb to even create better consistency. There's our guide. We're gonna let that slip through the back of our fingers so we've got enough space to make our rotations. And then use that big peak and valley circular motion to create some awesome texture. Now, with the hair being damp, with product in there, with the right angle of the razor, with good tension, we should feel that razor float right through the hair. If for some reason you feel like your razor is grabbing and tearing at the hair, check one of those aspects of your razor cutting. Something's gotta be off. Is it the quality of the blade? Is it your tension? Is the hair damp? Is there product? So one last section here on the left-hand side. Make sure she keeps her head in natural head position. And the whole time I'm gonna be moving her, but really in the salon, probably you're gonna keep the guest towards the mirror. Maybe you'll turn them, that's okay too, but we wanna make sure we move our feet and our body in relationship to their natural head shape. If we stand in the back, our natural tendency is gonna be to continue to overdirect back, and that's gonna build that length forward. If that's what you're looking for, great, no problem. But that's not what we're looking for at this point in the haircut. So we're gonna keep our body consistent. So I'm gonna continue working with vertical sections. We're gonna finish this last section on the left-hand side, then we're gonna step over to the right-hand side. Nothing is going to change as we work to the right-hand side. Body position, elevation, over direction, cutting length, all those things are going to stay the same. So I'm gonna just continue, I'm gonna finish up this side, then work off to her right. So go ahead and give yourself a little quick cross check. Take a horizontal section, keep it at the elevation that you cut the hair at. And remember, you're not necessarily looking for perfection here because you razor cut it. You're just looking to make sure that you have some nice balance between your sides. And this side looks pretty good. And that side looks pretty good. Cool. So we can continue on. So we're gonna work down this left-hand side. We'll go ahead and take out the clip and release all the hair on the side of the head. Now at this point, we are gonna change our over direction just a little bit. What we're going to do is we're going to just slightly over direct back as we move forward. The reason for this is we wanna keep these layers just a little bit longer as they get towards the face. But we wanna be cautious because if we go crazy with that over direction and really start pulling back, we're going to end up with that dog ear sort of effect, and nobody likes dog ears. Keep the hair damp throughout. That's one thing I probably could have done a little bit better on this back section, is just keep a little bit more water in there. So we'll again take that 1-inch section. So we're taking just a little bit of the section just behind that transition area as the guide. Then we're picking up the new hair. And again, what we're going to do is now the guide will stay at its natural position and the new piece of hair will just travel back to it. They're not huge sections, so just that slight over direction back is not going to introduce a ton of length going forward. The thing you really have to be cautious of here is the importance of that horizontal transition is it's where the head takes and creates a big change in direction. So if I keep my body parallel with the back of her head, because the head is now moving away from me, if I pull the hair back to me, over direct back to me, it's really gonna increase that over direction and create a lot of length towards the front. So just be really cautious, make sure you move your body with the natural head shape there. The elevation is gonna stay the exact same. Over direct back to that previously cut section. Be very, very gentle with that over direction so you don't create that dog ear sort of effect. 90 degrees to the head shape, following the head shape with our finger angle. And then those big long strokes to create a super soft texture. The great thing about this, when we're creating these sort of looks with a razor, is that we're building the texture that we want at the same time that we're building the shape itself. Next section, a little bit of the previously cut section. Grab the new hair, over direct back to that previously cut section, just slightly, just gentle. There's my guide from the previously cut section. Let it slide through just past my fingers. Most of the time what you'll find when you're razor cutting like this is you are gonna naturally build just a bit of length as you work, because with that slight passing over the guide section, it automatically leaves you just a tiny bit of length on that next section. What ends up happening is sometimes people want to really be super close to that guide, and when they do that, they end up cutting shorter. Right here, as the hairline jumps up, if you're concerned about the length that you want to cut, you can also start to change the finger angle a bit, and we'll check that when we take this section. Sometimes that slight bit of overdirection might take care of it, but sometimes you might need to just adjust finger angle just a bit to preserve some more length. So if we cut to this length here, that's the length that's gonna form our perimeter. We're gonna be pretty close, but I think we'll change the finger angle just slightly there so that we preserve just a little more length. Up here at the top of our section, we're gonna stay true 90. Our finger angle will stay parallel to the head shape. Guide just slid through. Let me make that circular motion. On the next section, instead of dropping, well, not dropping, but following the head shape with my elevation, which will bring us kind of lower here, let's take the elevation and let's lift it up. Along with a more vertical finger angle there, that allows us to maintain just a little bit of length there, which will help to fill in that hole that sometimes starts to form right around the ear. The overdirection wasn't quite enough for us, which a lot of times is true. And we don't want to necessarily change the overdirection because that's going to change the entire balance front to back. It's much easier to just change that finger angle slightly. And yes, it does create a slight disconnection or detachment at the bottom of your section, but that's what needs to happen. We get so caught up in everything has to touch and be matchy-matchy, and that's not the way the head is created. The head is so imperfect that we have to think more about balancing with head shape than everything being so perfectionistic so we can get prettier haircuts. Pretty doesn't mean perfect, and perfect doesn't mean pretty. So again, with this section, we're going to keep our elevation higher. We're not going to let that flow downward with the natural head shape. Keep our finger angle more vertical, and that's going to help us to preserve that length to fill in that gap. And that'll give us a nice length just right there under her neckline. We've got 2 sections left, nothing's gonna change, so I'm gonna continue moving forward here on the left-hand side. Okay, we've just completed the left-hand side. I just want to take one moment before we go down the right-hand side because something I know I was taught, and I think Sammy said that he was taught this as well, was that when you're over-directing especially, you're supposed to change hand position from side to side. What we've noticed is if you're working in a vertical section, that's not necessary. And what we've also found is when people start to change that hand position, our fingers were up on this side. I was told I should go fingers down on this side. If I do that, when I switch, we tend to drop the elevation. So with every decision we make, there's always a benefit to it, and there's always also a compromise. We feel that we see more consistency side to side if we can just stay in that same hand position from side to side and just use our over direction to make that shift. So not good or bad, just a concept, just a thought, and you get to make that decision for yourself. Grab some water. I love this continuous mist bottle because I can spray kind of a lot of water, but because it's such a fine mist, it doesn't feel like it's soaking the hair and make it drip. All right, nothing changes really as we go to this right-hand side, except we're over-directing back. Well, that doesn't necessarily change. It's gonna feel a little bit different since you're over-directing from a different side. So we'll take a small piece of new and a small piece of previous. Remember that we're starting to introduce just that slight over direction back. Be really, really cautious, can't stress that enough. And then again, here, we're going to work 90 degrees to the head shape. We'll continue this on this section. We won't change our finger angle too much on this first section because we're still working on top of the back hairline. So we don't have to worry about that little bit of dropout. So we'll continue down 90 degrees, following the head shape. And then on the next section, we're over directing back and we're going to change our finger angle and elevation just slightly at the bottom of this section to preserve a bit more length for the perimeter. Once you complete that right side, let's take just a moment and do a little bit of cross-checking. Again, we're not looking for perfection just because we are razor cutting. It's gonna be pretty loose, but we wanna make sure that we have some level of consistency front to back, and we're building that length forward. One thing that you're going to see here, just as a warning, because you changed that elevation and finger angle, down here, right where you changed that elevation and finger angle, you are going to see detachment, disconnection. And that's a good thing because that's that piece that helps to now fill in around the hairline. Scoop around to the opposite side here, take that section. Great, feeling good about that. Step forward, maybe just give it a little blouse forward. Let's not come up here and start measuring individual hairs, my friends, because that will drive you crazy. Use your eyes and make sure that you have visual balance, especially because, again, let's remember that this is a really imperfect surface. So if we go in and start to measure things really precisely, just because they're perfectly even lengths doesn't mean they're gonna fall balanced with her natural face shape. So leave the measuring sticks at home. All right, let's get down to the perimeter. Now we don't have to cut this before we cut the perimeter because none of this is going to touch the perimeter. And we can go back to our sectioning that we had similar to before, which is that little change in direction here at the horizontal transition. If you're Redken trained, you know this area as the corner back. Since we are trying to create something with visual texture, we're not gonna go back in and create all these tiny little sections and create a hyper precise perimeter. We're just going to take everything because only a little bit of hair is even gonna reach our perimeter. We're gonna find out where we have that density to be able to put the perimeter back in, and we're going to stop our fingers there. The razor is going to do the same thing, high tension, and then it will come in from the side of that section and create those circular movements. And since our straight razor is a guarded razor, you don't have to worry about tapping your finger a little bit with that blade. It's not gonna cut you. I mean, I'm sure if you got crazy and really started to press into the hair and press into your skin, maybe you could force it to cut you, but I'm somewhat careless and it still hasn't cut me, so I feel pretty confident. Let that hair from below start to peekaboo up right out of your fingers. You know that's where you need to stop. And then again, come through in your circular movements to remove the hair and leave some peaks and valleys. So we've gotten to this horizontal transition we keep talking about. This is the area that the head shape changes. In the salon, I'm gonna take my body and make a huge step to the side of the head. Since she's on a swivel, I'm gonna go ahead and swivel her around so that her head's more parallel to my body and continue forward. Now I'm making my circles from front to back. And if you want to get hyper technical, maybe it matters if you do that consistently from side to side, whether it's a front to back circle or a back to front circle. Because this is so highly textured, because it's going to be worn with curl and texture, it's not something we'd suggest that you get too worried about. If you're someone that likes all those little technical things, then maybe it is something that you'll put some energy into to make sure that those circles are going in the same direction. But especially if you're just starting out, especially if you're not one of those highly technical people, that is not something that we feel is going to make or break your haircut. So I'm going to just continue, work out this left-hand side. All right, once you finish that perimeter, remember, don't get out your rulers. If she's a mannequin head, pop her off the stand, give her a little shake, visually check for balance, and move on with your life. If she's a client that likes to measure everything, she's probably not going for these highly textured haircuts anyway. So let's get into the top. We're gonna take down just the left-hand side, the left half. And let's go ahead and create more of a horizontal section now. So we're gonna take a horizontal section from the back all the way to the front, and we need just enough hair to get a nice guide section. We are changing the technique because a couple things. We don't want to get too short on top, and we have a pretty nice guide now underneath for the angles and lines that we need for the top. You definitely could continue in a vertical section. They're going to be very small vertical sections because they're not going to go very far. And by taking a horizontal sections tend to leave weight. We want this shape to be pretty lean through the sides, but then we almost want a little bit of weight towards the top. So by switching to a horizontal section, we can maintain that weight. As we take the section, we're just gonna subsection through it. So we're gonna break it into sort of bite-sized chunks because we only wanna take as much as the width that we can stay on track with the natural shape of the head. With that section, our elevation is going to be 90 degrees to more of the wall. Actually a little bit above 90 degrees to the wall. On this very first section, we're actually gonna take it about 90 degrees to the head shape, but then we're gonna kind of create a stationary type of elevation. So you can see that's about 90 degrees to the head, but it's just a little bit above 90 degrees to the wall. And that's the type of elevation we wanna continue through the upper sections, because what that's gonna do is just build us a little bit of weight towards the top. So we'll take our next section, which is again, just enough that we're working with that natural head shape. Elevation's about 90 degrees to the natural head shape, or just above 90 degrees to the wall. It's kind of hard to show the razor cutting angle from this particular view. So if you look at it from that direction, it's still the exact same thing. It's just parallel with the floor. In fact, here's what we'll do for you. We'll give you a side view and we'll tilt her down so that you can see the movement. So by tilting her, this allows me to get kind of that same elevation, but it puts the cutting line more into view for you. So if I lift this up, you're gonna see there's the previously cut section. There's my guide. So I slide out to it, then I slide a little bit further to give myself that space to cut, and my fingers are mimicking the line that the guide showed me. And I know that this is a pretty odd angle here, but that's the way that you're gonna have to see it from. So I don't have an overhead camera in the studio today, so we're gonna have to make do. How about that? So again, make sure you're choosing a section that's not so wide that it's crossing around too much curvature of the head. That's gonna make more of a straight line to the cut. There's my guide from underneath. Finger angle follows it, slide past just enough to be able to cut. And use the razor to remove the hair. There's the finger angle, slide past the guide, and cut. So that's going to maintain everything that I did from the underneath, but switching to the horizontal section is gonna allow us to really efficiently build that just a little bit of weight towards the top edge of the layers. So I'm gonna continue with horizontal sections, maintain that exact same elevation from the first section, in essence creating a bit of a stationary guide, and just follow the same exact steps. Now that you've completed the left-hand side, let's get over to the right-hand side. On this right-hand side, again, nothing really changes. It's the exact same type of process. So we'll go into that horizontal section. We'll connect over to our opposite side just slightly. So that way you also have that tiny bit of guide from the opposite side to make sure you're consistent. Now, again, when you get here to your very first section and through all the sections, it's incredibly important that you only take enough hair that you are not crossing major curvatures in the head. So what do we mean by that? Right here is that horizontal transition from the back to where it really changes angle right there on the right-hand side. If you take a section the whole way across that corner, what happens when you get to here, you can see that this area right here, because it's already starting to travel away from you, all of a sudden you're introducing a ton of over direction there. And we don't need that over direction because the cutting line itself already is working short to long from the underneath. So if you increase that by putting more over direction on it, that's again where you're going to end up with excess weight on something like this. And we feel that that's something that happens kind of often with these bobs, is we want to preserve that length in the front. So we get really kind of crazy with the amount of over direction that we're putting on things to try and save all that length. And that's where we end up with that kind of dog ear type of effect, which isn't very pretty. So we'll move our body quite a bit right there because we've stepped around that transition. I'm able to tilt her head just a little bit so that you're able to see that keeps the elevation at that 90 degrees. Again, this first section you can think of as about 90 degrees to the natural head shape, or just a little bit above 90 degrees to the wall, which it might be beneficial to think about it from the wall because that's the rest of the sections are going to be measured more in relationship to the wall than the head shape. Last section, or last piece of that first section. Now from here on up, we'll keep her in natural head position, and we're just going to continue forward with those horizontal sections, cutting to the guide, and every section is going to be that elevation just about 90, a little bit above 90 degrees to the wall itself. Okay, now we have completed the main portion of the top. Now here's the thing, is because we cut from the center, what you're going to end up with is something that could feel a little out of balance if she goes in and parts from a deep side part. And the reason for that is there's a corner of weight here in the center that if I push it off to this side, I'm gonna get sort of these longer pieces hanging over here. If this gets flopped over to this side, there's some longer pieces hanging over here. So let's create a little bit of a solution for you. And this works on many of these kinds of haircuts that you're finding yourself being out of balance side to side. This is especially good if you have a guest that likes to change their part. So we're going to take a section across the top of the head. So side to side. And as we elevate that section straight up towards the ceiling, what we will find is that there's going to be a little bit of a corner there. And you'll see that there's just a bit of extra length right in the center. So this hair through here is the culprit. This is the hair that's going to create the challenge. So we'll grab our razor. And we're going to just work through, cutting short to long. And we're not necessarily trying to create a hard line here or an actual cutting line. What we're trying to do is take that corner of weight away so that when she moves her hair around, it's not going to form a corner on either side of the head. So again, taking a section across the top of the head. Do not manhandle your clients in the same way. They don't appreciate it. Now as we elevate this up to the ceiling, you'll notice just at that top change in the head, that's where we start to get that extra little bit of length. We'll slide our hand up so that we can access that hair and just cut short to long. Now in the very, very center, it might trip you out a little bit because you're probably going to be cutting a decent amount of hair right here in the very center. Don't worry about it, that's okay. That's that piece that's going to be troublesome. It's going to be so nice to get rid of that. But you're not necessarily taking away that weight that you preserved through the horizontal sections. You're just starting to take a little bit of weight off that very top surface. And then as you get to the front, we would recommend that you over direct that back quite a bit to preserve the length on the front. Even by over directing back, you're still gonna cut that little bit of corner out of it. So you'll notice that the over direction is coming pretty much back to the high point to preserve that length. Comb the hair straight up towards the ceiling. I know this is a lot of hair to hold, and if you need to subsection it, you absolutely could do that, and work short to long. One of the reasons I really like the swivel handle on this blade is it allows me to get the blade into position without doing some tricky stuff with my wrist. And that's one of our hallmarks, of course, is all about ergonomics, make sure that you have a really long life behind the chair. Cool. Now, with that little bit of corner of weight taken off, she has the ability to have much more fun with her hair, and it's going to float around. She can part it from this side, she can do a kind of a deep side part, and it's not going to form some weird heaviness over on this side when she flops it over to that side. All right, next step is we've got to get her blow dried. For the blow dry, we're gonna add just a little bit of one product, which is the One United. We could have added this in right from the very beginning because even with that and the Satinware 04, it's not like it's gonna make the hair heavy at all. It just has a little bit of slip to it. So sometimes I notice with both of them, it's almost hard to get the tension because it actually has a really nice slip to it. So typically for my personal taste, I like to put one or the other in as our base product, then float anything else needed over top. The only thing we'd really highly recommend that you don't do is add any kind of volumizing or hold product before razor cutting, because then you can kind of bind up the razor. So we'll work that through. We're gonna start with the Signature Series paddle brush. We want lots of looseness and texture and movement to the overall shape here. So by using the paddle brush that has a bit wider tooth spacing, the Artist Series paddle brush has that additional boar hair bristle, so it's gonna create a lot of tension. We actually kind of don't want the tension for this. And we're going to start from the crown area because we really want this to radiate out from the crown. We'll use the Light Professional Ionic Dryer. This is our limited edition rose gold version. By the time this video comes out, we will probably have just a few of these left. And if you're watching this later, this is 2019, November 2019. This video will come out in November 2019. So what you might find is by the end of Christmas, these will be sold out. So if you see this video before then, jump on and grab one because they're pretty cool looking. All right, so we're just gonna set up that crown area sort of in a spiral fashion. So that way, as we dry, we're going to work the hair around the head shape, then we'll switch, work the hair the opposite direction. Let's go ahead and turn the dryer on and we'll do a little bit of that. So we're gonna work the hair towards the face, towards the face, towards the face. Once it's moving that direction, we're gonna flip hands and now start to work the hair away from the face, away from the face, away from the face. And the reason we're doing that is to get a lot of looseness into this hair. The last thing we want is this sitting still. We want the hair to float and move around the head. So now, once we get the root direction starting to move, then we can start to move around the head more. So now we'll go to the other side of the crown, work that back and away from the face, switch hands, start to work it towards the face. And the whole time the brush is in contact with the head and the nozzle of the dryer is following close behind the brush. One of the things we often tell you is slow down to speed up. I'm moving a little quicker this time because I kind of want to work the hair. If I really slow down like we typically show you, I might create almost too much collapse in the hair and too much flatness, and it might want to stay still. So by working it back and forth, it takes a little bit more energy. Probably is going to slow down my blow dry time just a little bit because I'm not letting the heat penetrate the hair, but I'm going to maintain more movement in the hair. So, hey, sometimes our little sayings work and sometimes we contradict them, right? Now from here, we're gonna have her tilt her head down and we're gonna be able to access the nape. An exact same process through the nape. Then we'll go to the sides and then the front, and we'll use just a little bit of round brush process through the ends to polish up the ends. But the nice thing about a great wrap dry is it's not gonna leave you with a ton of work to do with that round brush. So I'm just gonna continue working around the head. From this point in the blow dry, we really don't have to do a whole lot more from the base into the mid strands. Really, it's from the mid strand to the ends. So we're gonna pick up the Artist Series Spiral Thermal Brush. Love this brush because it retains heat like a thermal brush, but the boar hair bristle is gonna provide a lot more polish. We're going to be really loose about this. We're just gonna take some sections, brush through the ends to loosen up any kind of tangles that formed when we were wrap drying. And we're just going to introduce the heat and airflow to the brush and polish right through the ends of the hair. We're not trying to really necessarily round brush this hair a whole lot. We're just looking to just polish up those ends a little bit. And so it's not going to take a ton of energy to get through just that little bit of the ends. You can see you get great tension with this brush. So what you'll notice is that, again, all this stuff looked great. It was really just that stuff that needed a little polish. We're not looking for a flat iron polish. We want to leave a little bit of body and texture and movement into the hair. So we're just going to continue working around in sections, really random sections, just super loose with this technique. Grab a hold of the hair, focus the heat and airflow just right onto those ends to polish them up. Keep a little bit of movement and body to it. Blow dry's all finished. It's time for detailing. And you'll notice we didn't overdo the blow dry here. We really wanted to keep a little bit of fullness and texture to the hair. So be cautious, because sometimes I feel like we try to over finish hair, we over round brush, we over polish everything. Then we're using rough textured products to try and reintroduce texture into the hair. If you don't want this super shiny, silky type of finish, don't overstretch the hair with a round brush. Don't overdo things like flat irons. Leave a little bit of fullness to the hair. Because yeah, she's a little fluffy, a little raw looking, but once we introduce a tiny bit of spray wax into this, it's gonna be perfect. So let's go to the nape area first, because this is definitely the area that's going to tend to be a little heavy for us. And also we can take a look at that perimeter. The sides are looking great as far as perimeter goes. The neckline is just looking a little bit out of control to me. So we're going to use the Signature Series reversible blending shear, and we're just going to peel a little bit of that stuff off the bottom. It's fun using a blending shear for this because I feel like it leaves a more razored type of vibe to the perimeter. If we went through and point cut, it can sometimes blunt things up even though we're trying to be soft. So by using the blending shear, it keeps those edges very razor feeling. Great, now let's just extract a little bit of weight from that neckline too, because it is just a tiny bit heavy. We're gonna have her tilt her head forward just slightly for us, and we'll take the shear very parallel to the hair, slightly diagonal, and just take a little snip, 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 snip. And since I'm using the Signature Series reversible blender on this, I don't have to do a whole lot. The tooth spacing on this particular shear is pretty tight together. So you don't have to make a bunch of cuts. If we're using the Invisiblend, which is a much softer blending shear, we might have to make a couple more cuts there. And if you're nervous, you can always switch to a shear like that just so you don't go overboard. Now, I'd like to introduce a little bit more interior texture and separation into the hair. So I'm going to show you a couple different ways to do this. One, we can use the reversible blender with a technique that we call weave and blend. So we're going to take the solid blade of the shear and we're going to weave through the hair, and then we're going to just blend out through the ends. What that does is it takes peaks and valleys out of the hair rather than being so soft. If I went in and just introduced the shear this way, it's going to just soften and take weight out. So that we can get some movement into the hair, we have to create peaks and valleys to introduce airspace. So that's why we weave it through. And then as we slide out, just open and close, open and close. So that's going to take some pretty distinct pieces out of the hair. Just continue to play with the hair as you're doing this process. Be orderly in the process so that you don't keep picking up the same section of hair, because then that could potentially lead to over texturizing, which is a really frequent thing that we see when we're coaching people on this type of process. Working in vertical sections, and you'll notice we're going back to that same elevation that we used within the haircut. One of the other frequent mistakes that we see is that we ignore that elevation over direction and finger angle also play a part when we're texturizing. So for example, if I take my section like this really low and the weave goes this way, I'm actually creating more of a graduated feel and creating a bit of weight within that texturized line. Because I don't want to reintroduce weight, I want to keep the elevation high and make sure that I'm following more of that vertical angle that we used when we cut the hair. We're not going to have to do quite as much through the sides just because there's a lot less density. And just to break up this upper surface, let's do the exact same thing. We'll take a horizontal section this time. And in that horizontal section, we're going to do the exact same thing. Take and just weave the section. Pretty bold, but because I'm sliding out as we cut, I'm not camping out in one spot, it's not going to make blunt lines. But that helps to add those shorter bits in there, create some airspace, some texture, and some movement. We'll do some more of that here through the side because you can see there's just a little bit of a heaviness there. So we can break up that heaviness by going straight to that area. We're leaving the hair at a fairly low elevation because we want that to be more deliberate. You'll see that separates that real nicely, creates a lot more movement, a lot more texture. So let's do one more section on this side, and then we'll show you one more technique on the other side with the slide cutting shear. All right, finished. I'm feeling really good about that texture and movement. And like I said, once we introduce a little bit of spray wax or even some spray shine, it's gonna take that fluffiness out of it and really bring out the definition we just introduced with that cutting technique. Now the other option would be to use the slide cutting shear to do this, and this is fun as well. So when you're using the slide cutting shear, you have a couple options based on how much hair you wanna take out. If I don't want to take a lot of hair out, I'm not going to put any tension on the hair, and we're just going to work through and close as we work through the hair. Now, if we do that, we're not going to create those peaks and valleys and that deep texture that we did with that weave and blend technique. So we're going to take this section, drape it into our hand, and actually create a bit of tension so that as we close, the shear can capture more hair. This shear is purposely designed to push hair so that it slides out. And yes, I did just drop my comb. I'll pick it up in a second. But the design of the shear is so that it allows the hair to push out of the shear a bit, and that produces softer lines. It also helps to protect the hair a little bit, because if we get a lot of drag from the shear when we're doing these techniques, we can rough up the cuticle. Pardon me for just a second. If it was the real salon, I would not pick up my comb off the floor. Don't get after me. I don't think she cares. But create a lot of tension here. Work in with that slide cutting shear. Really gonna get it pretty aggressive in these front pieces because there's a lot of hair right here. And we wanna get some nice airflow and airspace working through there. So, where you see those really bulky spots, don't be afraid to get pretty aggressive with this technique. Then I am actually really kind of liking these heavier, longer pieces around the face, especially once we get a little bit of product on there. We'll just add a little bit of separation here and there, but I don't want to take that length away. This is something that we're starting to see come back within these haircuts. We're not quite seeing quite as much of the heavily layered appearance around the face, like these longer bits happening. Cool, this is looking good to me. Let's put the shears down. That's always a hard thing, right? We want to keep working and working and kind of keep perfecting the haircut, but at some point we have to let the guest leave, which was always a hard thing for me as a hairdresser. We're gonna grab some Wax Blast 10. This is Redken's Wax Blast 10. as we introduce the product, you can pick up a blow dryer and blow the hair around. I like to just take my hands and just sort of fluff the hair and keep the product back really far. So as the hair is moving, it's just gently picking up some product. If you get close, you spray a spot, you're gonna see that spot. It's gonna be true with any kind of spray wax type of a product. Hairsprays too. Be lighter and gentler with that spray and get a better distribution. Keep the bottle back away from the head. Cool. And you can see how those ends just start to pick up the wax, get some definition into them. I like to grab my comb at this point. It's almost like you build the hair up and then bring it back down into place. So get it kind of wild. The clients love that, make their hair look just totally nuts. Then start to replace your design. And just using the little parting tooth on the comb to help bring those ends back together from being fluffy. So as I'm primping here, let's just recap the haircut together. First things first, we want to go into that foundational breakdown. We want to find the area between the sides and the top. We call that the vertical transition of the head. Part off that area of the head, and then we go into the horizontal transition, which is that area between the back of the head and the sides of the head, right where it starts to turn and change in that corner. We're going to start with vertical sections in center back. What's our elevation? That's right, through the back. It's 90 degrees to the head shape, or those of you that are Redken trained, you're gonna know that as planes of the head. And then as we start to hit the horizontal transition, what's going to change? Correct. I could hear you through the camera. We're going to change the elevation just slightly. We're going to elevate the bottom area of that section just to introduce a little bit of extra length here in the perimeter. And as you can see, yeah, no holes, right? And that's because we changed that elevation just slightly. Then, as we finish the sides, oh yeah, and don't forget to do your slight elevation back to build just a bit of length towards the front. Then when we get to the top, we change into horizontal sections. So then we continue in horizontal sections. The elevation is, the first section is about 90 degrees to her natural head shape, but then from there on, think of it more as the elevation being just above 90 degrees in relationship to the wall itself. There's that one piece of hair right there that just doesn't know where it wants to go. That happens with our guests too. Then blow dryer out, use some blending shear techniques. That, weave and blend technique is gonna be great for you to create some separation in texture and movement. You can try the slide cutting techniques. If you don't have a slide cutting shear, you can still do that. The challenge that you're gonna run into is it's not made to slide and slip through the hair, so it's going to probably grab a little bit, and you're just gonna have to be a little bit more careful that you don't take big pieces out of the hair with that. So, hope you enjoyed this razor layered, heavily textured bob. You can see we got really nice and lean through those sides, and we were able to build some weight towards the top. That really creates an illusion of tons of fullness in this haircut. So, give it a shot on your next guest, on a mannequin, on a friend that maybe isn't gonna care if you screw it up a little bit. But make sure you try something fresh, something new this week, because that's how we change and develop as hairdressers. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Andrew Carruthers, Education Director for Sam Villa.